Good?
Yeah.
All right, we're on DAF Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, and we had seen a statement from Rav yesterday describing what, in his opinion, was mifarcheses. Now, mifarcheses is something that the Mishnah requires an animal to do when it was previously misukenes, when it was in the last stages of its life. We need to verify that it is fully alive while it's being shechted throughout the shechita. And therefore, it has to do certain things. It has to flail or make other kinds of motions in order to demonstrate that it's alive. So Rav had said, what is the definition of mifarcheses? What kind of movements does it have to do? So he gave a number of options, and that was at the top line of our Amud. Goa, either it could grunt or moan, some kind of noise that it makes. Vihitila rei, or if it defecates, or vikishka shabe ozna, or if it wags its ear. Any of those are sufficient that if it does those during the shechita, that's a sign that it was alive during the shechita, and the shechita is kosher. Okay, so the Gemara now is going to challenge that. So we're several lines down. It's about the 15th line, I would guess, maybe something around there. Meisvei, starting the line with Rabbi Yossi Omer, Haya Reb Meir Omer. That we have a brisa.
I'm sorry to ask.
Sure.
How long are we talking about? Is seconds? In other words, the shechita takes a few seconds.
Takes seconds. So in the course of the shechita, now we're going to define at what stage of the shechita the animal has to do that. We're going to discuss that momentarily.
Okay.
But at some point during the shechita, the animal has to be making this kind of movement or action.
But once you're cutting him, something's going to happen to him. It might
Well,
be
an animal could be so listless because it doesn't move at all because it's so close to death. And that's where we would say that the shechita is possible. The animal has to make some kind of motion. These are the kinds of motions that Rab says are acceptable.
I'm not afraid that the shechita itself triggers the reaction to something else.
Well, how does shechita trigger defecation? The animal has
Actually,
to be
when people
because they're alive. Because they're alive, right? Shechita,
and that's why it's a
but a
positive good
moan,
sign.
for sure, a moan. If you're saying it's had
because it's alive. A moaning can only be done by a living animal, right? That's the whole point. It has to show, it has to demonstrate that it's alive. So the
Except in
brisa.
science fiction.
So we're challenging this all from the following brisa. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Haya Reb Meir Omer, Goa Bishas Shchita Ein Ze Pirchos. That Rabbi Yossi quotes Reb Meir as saying that if it moans or grunts during the Shchita, that's not sufficient Pirchos. It's a direct statement contradicting Rav. And Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishmo, Afilu Hitila Rei V'Kishka Shabiznava Ein Ze Pirchos. And Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, also quoting Reb Meir, says that even if it defecates and it wags its tail, that's not sufficient pirchus. So we've got two tanoim now. One says that moaning or grunting is not sufficient. The other one says that defecation is not sufficient. Both contradict Rav. So kasha goa agoya, kasha rei arei. Rav is contradicted by two tanoim. So the Gemara says we can reconcile that. Goa agoya lo kasha, hada'avi kala, hada'ami kala. So the Gemara says, no, there's different kinds of moans and groans. If an animal has a full-throated groan, that's a sign that it's alive. But the Brisa was talking about a faint groan, a very weak moan, and that's insufficient. Rei arei nami lo kasha, kan b'shoseses, kan b'matrezes. And there's two types of defecation also. There's the explosive defecation, and then there's the defecation that comes out in a trickle. So if it comes out in a trickle, that's not sufficient.
There's no power to the animal, it just sort of
right, it just happens. Yeah. But if the animal has an explosion, right, an explosive bowel movement, then that's a sign that the animal was alive during shechita. Right? I'm sure you can relate after a good CHULLIN. Anyway, so Amar Rav Chisda, Pirchus Sha'amru.
If this was 12-year-olds, they'd be on the floor.
That's right. Pirchus Sha'amru B'sov Shchita. So this goes to Rabbi Black's question, which is, at what stage of the animal of the shchita does the animal have to do this act of pirchus, of motion, or of demonstration that it's still alive? It has to be done, says Rav Chisda, my Rebbeim told me that it has to be done besof shchita. It has to be done at the end of the shchita. But my besof shchita, be'emtza shchita, lafuke tchilas shchita delo. But Rav Chisda says, let me explain to you what my Rebbeim meant. When they said it has to be at the end of shchita, they didn't mean literally at the end of shchita. It could even be in the middle of the shchita. All they meant is that it cannot be at just the beginning of the shchita. So, Amar Rav Chisda mino aminala. How can I prove this to you? That when my Rebbeim said that it means at the end, it doesn't literally mean at the end, it means in the middle. So he says, I'll show you how I know this. Ditnan behema daka shepashta yad v'lo hechzira pisula. Because let's go back to our mission that we learned yesterday. It said that if the movement during shechita is the animal straightening its leg from it was previously bent and it straightens it during the shechita, that's not a valid sign of pirchus. And why did we say that? Why is that? Because that's actually a reflexive action of an animal who's dying. That's Rabbi Black. That's what you were arguing, that there are certain things that happen as a result of death, right? That happen reflexively. So that's what the Mishnah had said is purely a reflexive action, and therefore it's not indicative of the animal being alive. So the Gemara now says, Emas. When is the Mishnah suggesting that if it does that, it's puzzle? If you're going to tell me that if it does it at the end of shechita, that's still an invalid sign of life, come on, that's not a valid argument. If at the end of the shechita, the animal makes that reflexive action, how long are we expecting it to live after the shechita? In other words, that's not a legitimate argument. You mean to tell me that even if it does that as the shechita is finishing, that's not a valid sign of pirchus? I mean, how long are we supposed to expect the animal to remain alive? Why did we say that that's purely reflexive action? Because normally it would have to extend its arm and then bend it again. But how can you expect it to stay alive after shechita for such a long time? It's dead. I mean, really, shechita causes death.
Yes, exactly.
So why should you argue that this is invalid if it's happening at the end of shechita? What else is the animal supposed to do when it's dying? So elalav be'emsa shechita. So that's Rav Chisda says, that's why I conclude that it means that if in the middle of the shechita, before you actually complete the shechita, the animal extends, straightens its arm and doesn't pull it back, that's not valid, because that could mean that it died in the midst of the shechita. So Amar le Rava la'olam b'sov shechita sha'ani omer kol she'ena osa kein b'sov shechita b'yadua shenishmas natula himena kaidem lachein. And Rava says, I disagree. I hold that when your Rebbeim said that it has to be mefarcheses at the end of shechita, they literally mean end of shechita, not middle of shechita. And you know how I know that? He says, because even your argument is not valid. Your argument was, well then, how can you say that it's invalid if it straightens its leg at the end of shechita? The answer is that the straightening of the leg is a reflexive action that happens seconds after it died, seconds after its neshama departed. In other words, there are still neurological reflexes that occur even post-mortem. And so what Rava is arguing is that if at the end of the shechita, the animal extended its leg, that's a sign that it was already dead a couple seconds before, in the middle of the shechita. And that's why it's no good. So therefore, when the rabbi said that it has to be mefarcheses at the end of shechita, it literally means at the end of shechita. And therefore, if it moves back and forth its leg, that's okay. That's a sign that it's still alive. But if it just straightens its leg, its arm, and it doesn't pull it back, so then that's not a good sign. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Pircha Shamru B'tchila Shchita. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak argues with both Rav Chisda and with Rava, and he says, no, I hold that as long as it's mifarcheses at any stage of the shechita, even at the beginning of the shechita, that is sufficient. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Mina Aminola. And how can I prove this to you? Ditnan Amar Reb Shimon Hashochet Balayla Lamachar Matzah Kisalim Alayim Dam Kishera Shazinka Uchamidas Rabbi Eliezer. Because if you recall yesterday from our Mishnah, we had said that Reb Shimon does not require us to witness the animal flailing its legs. All Reb Shimon requires is that we see blood splattered all over the area. And if that's the case, then that's a sign that the animal, this was Rabbi Eliezer Shita, that if the blood splatters at the time of Shechita, that's a sign that the animal is robust and alive, and its musculature is pushing out the blood in a very robust fashion. So that's a sign. And therefore, Reb Shimon said, even if you shech the animal in the middle of the night when it's pitch black, and there's no way to see the motion of its appendages, as long as you see blood splattered, that's a sign that it was alive. Va'amar Shmuel kosle beis shchita shaninu. And as Shmuel had explained, we're not talking about blood splattering on the walls of the room where you're shechting. We're talking about blood splattering locally, all around the throat. So, Iyamart bishlama b'tchila shchita shapir, ela Iyamart b'sov shchita lecha shtilma b'tchila shchita zinka. So the argument is as follows. If you're going to tell me that the act of mifarcheses is only a valid sign if it does it at the end of shechita, then if you shecht it in the dark, you don't know when that blood splattered.
Right.
How do you know when the blood splattered?
Yeah.
If it's so localized to the area of the throat. And therefore, just doing a post-mortem, a forensic analysis is going to be insufficient, because maybe it happened at the beginning of the shechita, not at the end. So from the fact that Reb Shimon holds that this is acceptable to do a post-mortem, shows me that even if it's zinka at the beginning of the shechita, that is sufficient. So you see that pirchos, mifarchesis, could be accomplished at the beginning of shechita, doesn't have to happen at the end of shechita. So frek the Gemara, v'dilma shayni zinuk da'adif. But 1 second, says the Gemara, maybe zinuk, this splattering of blood, is a superior sign of life, such that maybe only for zinuk, the splattering of the blood, is it sufficient if you see it at the beginning of shechita. But as far as flailing of the limbs, you have to see that at the end of the shechita. Maybe there's a difference qualitatively between the symptom of zinuk versus the symptom of flailing. So umi adif. But how could you possibly suggest that? The language of the Mishnah shows that that's not the case, because v'hatznan, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Daya im Zinka. So, because Rabbi Eliezer says it's enough if it just does zinuk, if it splatters the blood. Saying that if it's enough if it splatters, implies that that's less of a symptom of life than flailing of the limbs. Not a superior symptom of life. So you can't argue that that it's a superior symptom and therefore can be done at the beginning of shechita. So, but the Gemara says not necessarily, because maybe I'll argue kal midiraban Gamliel va'adif midirabanan. Maybe what Rabbi Eliezer meant was, we saw 3 opinions in the Mishnah. The first opinion was Rabban Gamliel, and he was so machmer. He said you need to see the flailing of both the front legs and the hind legs. Then you saw Rabbi Eliezer who says, no, it's enough if it just splatters blood. And then you saw the opinion of the Chachamim, who say that it only has to flail either the front legs or the hind legs. It doesn't have to flail both the front and the back. Okay? So maybe what Rabbi Eliezer simply means to say is that zinka is a superior symptom of life. It's not as superior as all 4 legs flailing, but it's certainly superior to just front or hind legs flailing. And maybe that's where there's a machlokas, that if it's in the dark and you can't see, so then splattering of the blood at the beginning of shechita is sufficient. But if it's just a question of watching the front legs or the hind legs, so then you would need to see that at the end of the shechita. So that's the way the Gemara is challenging Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So you have no raya. In other words, what the Gemara is essentially saying is that even though you're correct that zinuk could be done at the beginning of shechita as a symptom of life, but that doesn't necessarily indicate that the flailing can also be done at the beginning. Amar Ravina, Amar Lisama bar Chilkoi, Akshi ba avuha debar abobaram, va'amri la achva debar abobaram, umidarabanan mi adif. So, without going carefully through the names, Ravina says that it was related to me that a certain yeshiva student had asked the following question: how could you possibly say that looking at the language of the Mishnah, that Rabbi Eliezer's symptom of life is a stronger symptom of life than the flailing of either the front or the hind legs. V'hatznan v'chachamim omrim ad shetifarches o biyad o beregel. So, because the language of the Mishnah is, the Chachamim say it's not valid unless or until the animal flails with either the front or the hind. And Rabbanan ahaya kaimu. So, to whom are the Chachamim addressing when they say it's not sufficient unless you have this? They can't be directly challenging Rabban Gamliel, because Rabban Gamliel says you need to have more than what the Chachamim say. So to say that the Chachamim say it's not valid unless you have this, that's an inaccurate language of challenge if they're being more makel than Rabban Gamliel. They should have said, since you all you need is to have the front or the hind, if they're challenging Rabban Gamliel. So Elapshita ad Rabbi Eliezer, v'i'adif my ad, and therefore they must be going to address Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that you need to have a symptom of zinuk, and that is sufficient, splattering of blood. And the Chachamim say, no, that is insufficient. That is not okay. You must rather have this. You must rather have the flailing of either the front or the hind leg. So you see that the whole language of the Mishnah implies that Rabbi Eliezer's symptom of zinuk is the most lenient or the least viable symptom of life, right? Even less viable than the movement of either the front or the hind legs. And therefore the conclusion of the Gemara is that we're supporting Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. In other words, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's position is defended. He says, listen, if zinuk can be accomplished at the beginning of Shechita as a sign that the animal is viable at the time of Shechita, then the same would hold true according to the Chachamim with the flailing of the limbs. If zinuk is sufficient at the beginning of Shechita, then certainly the flailing of the limbs is sufficient at the beginning of the Shechita. And that's Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Shita. He proves it from the Lashon, from the language of the Mishnah itself. Rava Omar, but Rava says, let's go back to what Rava had said. Pirchus shamra b'sof Shechita. Remember, Rava had said that no, the Pirchus has to be done at the end of Shechita. And so apparently he's going to hold that maybe zinuk is a special case, but pirchus, the flailing of the limbs, has to be done at the end of Shechita. So Amar Rava mina aminala. So Rava says, you know how I can prove this? And by the way, it's not clear. Maybe Rava would argue that, we really don't know. Actually, Tosfos says, he says, V'hadalo chayshinan dilma b'tchila shchita zinek mishum delo shchicha sheyazinuk ela b'sof. So Rava says you always have to have the symptom of pirchus at the end, including zinuk. Has to be at the end. What about the fact when you shechted in the dark, you don't know when it did zinuk? Tosfos says regular zinuk usually always takes place at the end of shechita. So that's why we assume that it took place at the end of shechita, even when it was done in the dark. That's Rava's shita. So Amar Rava mina aminala. So Rava says, you know how I can prove this to you? Detanya shor o chesev. Now, by the way, what we're about to see is a brisa that has nothing to do with shechita. And we're going to see that what Rava is doing is making an analogy to childbirth and shechita. And you'll see how that works in just a second. So because the Torah says, this is a famous Torah reading, we read it during the Shalosh Regalim. And the Torah says, Shor o chesev o ez ki yivaled v'haya shivas yomim tachas imo. That when a newborn calf or kid or lamb is born, it has to remain with its mother for 7 days, and only then may it be brought as a korban. Okay, so the brisa picks up on the extraneous language. The word "o" appears twice in this pasuk extraneously. So "o chesev prat lekilayim." So the first time it says "o" is to tell me that if the animal is a crossbreed from two different species, it's not acceptable as a korban. O is the second extraneous O tells me prat linidmeh, that if the animal appears to be morphologically of a different species from its mother, even though it's a purebred, it's still not acceptable as a korban. And ki yivaled, the extraneous words of it, when it shall be born, what does that teach me? Prat liyotze doifan. This excludes an animal that was born C-section. In other words, it required human intervention in order to extract the child, because Kiyav Aleid implies that it was natural childbirth that the mother pushed the baby out. And Shivas Yamim, Prat L'Mechusar Zman. It has to be 7 days with its mother, which means that if it's anything less than 7 days old, it cannot be brought as a korban. Tachas Imo, it has to be under its mother's tutelage. Prat Liyasam. This excludes an orphan. Now, this is the conclusion of the Brisa. We have to now analyze the Brisa. Ha Yasam Hechidami. So Rav is arguing like this. When the Brisa says that its mother has to be with it for 7 days, and if not, it's an orphan and therefore cannot be used as a korban, what does that mean? Question mark. He says, it can't mean literally that its mother has to be alive during the entire time that the animal is alive until it's brought as a korban. Why should we require, there's no logic to why we'd require the mother to be alive in order to bring this animal as a korban. Why does the mother have to be alive at the time when it's brought as a korban? That doesn't make any sense. So, Ella demesa v'hadar yilidite. Perhaps what it means is that if during labor the mother dies and then the baby is born, the baby is sometimes born, it has to be extracted from the corpse's womb. But the Gemara says, but if that's the case, and you're telling me that that's the reason why it's not valid, because it wasn't born from a living mother, but michiyav aleid nafka, that's already derived from the pasuk of kiyav aleid, that it has to be natural childbirth. If it's extracted, then that's not valid. So we already have extra verbiage for that. So you don't have to tell me tachas imo for that. So ela pshita zeh piresh lemisa v'zeh piresh l'chaim. So we must conclude that what it means is as follows: that at the very moment that the kid was exiting the birth canal, at that very moment the mother dies. Mm-hmm. And so the animal no longer has to be extracted, as we'll just show in just a minute. So Iyamart bishlama ba'inin chiyusa b'sof leida, hainu de'itzrich kra le'me'ute, ela Iyamart lo ba'inin chiyusa b'sof leida, lama le mechiyuv aleid nafka. So the Gemara Rava makes the following argument. We must be talking about where the mother dies just as the calf is exiting the birth canal. Yeah. Because if it dies at any point earlier than that, then it needs to be extracted. Yes. And you already know that from the pasuk of the words ki yivaleid. Yeah. So tachas ima must be teaching me that even when the animal doesn't require further extraction because it's almost out, it still is not valid because the mother died as it was coming out of the mother's body. Mm-hmm. So therefore, what do you see from here? You see that a process that requires signs of life, you have to show those signs of life at the very end of that process, not in the middle or the beginning of the process. And therefore, just like a mother must show signs of life in order for her child to be usable as a korban, even though you could have argued at any point on that continuum is sufficient, we make the application by comparison to the laws of shechita. That similarly, if we require the animal to be alive during the shechita, it must be alive or show signs of life at the end of shechita, not just in the middle or the beginning of the shechita. That's the analogy that Rava makes to the laws of childbirth. Okay, and therefore, that's Rava's proof. It's not a proof from the language of the Mishnah like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak was doing, but rather conceptually that just like by childbirth we need the mother to be alive throughout until the very end of the process, so too we need the animal to demonstrate life at the very end of the shechita process. Amar Rava. Yes?
I guess the only question I have is, shechting kills an animal, childbirth doesn't. So it's like when during the cutting of the simonim, or does the animal die? I mean...
Well, the animal dies actually usually only after the cutting is done. That's when the animal dies.
Case, is that,
yeah, in a normal case. Yeah.
So we're saying that if the animal died before that completion of the cutting,
that would render the shechita invalid.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Amar Rava Hilchasa ki hamas nisa. So now Rava makes a final statement, and he says the psak halacha, not regarding this statement of psak no longer is addressing the issue of at what stage does Pirchos have to take place, because that Rava feels that he's sufficiently addressed. But Rava says, as far as how we paskin in this machlokus in our Mishnah, we paskin as follows. Look at the Tosefta. The Tosefta says, Behema daka shepashta yada v'lo hechazira pisula. That if we're dealing with a behema daka, which means a sheep or a goat, right? If it sticks out, if it straightens its front leg and does not bend it afterwards, that's puzzle, because that's not a valid sign of pirchos, as we had stated. Bamed dvar mamurim biyad, avol beregel ben pashta v'lo kafufa ben kafufa v'lo pashta kshera. And the Tosefta elaborates and it says, but that's only when it comes to the front leg. If we're dealing with the hind leg does not straighten reflexively as a sign of death. So therefore, even if when it comes to the hind leg, even if it just straightens, that's a sign of pirchus, and the animal will be kosher. Bamedvar mamurim bidaka, avol begasa ben biyad ben beregel ben pashta v'lo kafufa ben kafufa v'lo pashta kishera. And then the Tosefta also states explicitly that this all is dealing with a behema daka, like a sheep or a goat. But if you're dealing with a behema gasa, like a cow or an ox, then all signs of movement, even if it just straightens its front leg, that's a valid sign of life, and that's not considered a reflexive action, and therefore the shechita is going to be kosher. Va'of afilu lo rifreif ela gapo, v'lo kishkeish ela zinavo, harei ze pirchos. And then the final thing that the Tosefta says is when it comes to a bird, like you shecht a pigeon or you shecht a chicken, right? So you need to see, if it was a misukenes, you need to see signs of movement at the end of the shechita. And so what are those signs of movement? Even if it only quivers on its back, on the back feathers, or if it just shakes slightly its tail, that's at the end of shechita, that's a sign that it was viable throughout and it's kosher. So the Gemara now says, thank you, Rava, for quoting the Tosefta for us, but shkoyach for nothing, because my kamashmalan, kuluhu tanani. What is the Tosefta teaching me that the Mishnah itself didn't teach me? That cannot be inferred from the Mishnah. Behema daka shapashta yada v'lo hechzira pisula she'ena ela hotzoas nefesh. Look, the language of our Mishnah was that if you have a behema daka, right, a small animal, if it straightens its front leg and does not pull it back in, so it doesn't bend it again, so then that's puzzle, because that's just a sign of yitzias neshama, of death. That's a reflexive sign of death. That's not a sign of viability. So you can infer from our Mishnah, yad in regulo. The Mishnah says explicitly it's yad, which is its front leg, not its hind leg. So of course the Tosefta said that explicitly, but it's inferable directly from the Mishnah. And daka in gasalo. And furthermore, the Mishnah said explicitly we're only talking about a behema daka, but by a behema gasa, any kind of movement is acceptable as a sign of viability. So what is the Brisa telling me that I couldn't infer from the Mishnah? So the Gemara answers, you're right. Of it's trichale delotnan. The answer is that the Tosefta adds the laws by birds. And that's why Rava invoked the Tosefta to tell me, not only do we have psak halacha from our Mishnah about a behema daka and a behema gasa, but we also have psak halacha for ofos as well from our Tosefta. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Hashochei la'obe kochavim shchitaso kisher. Totally different subject now. If a Jew, shechts for a heathen, an idolater. So the Chachamim say that if the idolater now wants to give a piece of meat to his friend the Jew's totally allowed to eat it. It's perfectly kosher. It's kosher meat. So the Rebbe Eliezer poisel. But Rebbe Eliezer says, no, it's no good, and we'll see why. Amar Rebbe Eliezer, afilu shachta lecho la'ove kochavim mechatzar kaved shala pesula, shestam machsheves ove kochavim la'avodas kochavim. And Rebbe Eliezer, to bring home this point, he says that even if the goy tells the Jew, please shecht for me because I would like to eat the chatzar kaved, which they translate as the diaphragm, or it's the tissue that's surrounding the liver, which apparently is a delicacy. And he says, I want to eat this delicious part of the animal. Nonetheless, you have to consider the whole animal to be non-kosher for a Jew. Why? Because since it belongs to a heathen, we have to assume that the heathen was thinking that this shechita is a homage to my god Jupiter, or whoever his god is. And therefore, anything that is dedicated to Avodah Zarah is asur for hana to a Jew. And that's why the shechita is a kosher shechita. But the animal is asur bahana because of Avodah Zarah. That's the reason why you can't partake of it. So Amar Reb Yossi, kal v'chomer hadvarim, u'ma b'makom shehamachshava poiseles b'mukdashin ein hakol holich ela achar ha'oived, makom she'ein machshava poiseles b'chulin, ein odin shelo yeh hakol holich ela achar ha'shochet. Reb Yossi says, I don't understand what you're saying, Rabbi Eliezer. He says, I can make a kal v'chomer from the laws of Kodshim. You're suggesting that the thoughts of the owner of the animal is going to taint the animal in some way? Since when do we see such a concept? That the person who just owns the animal but is not engaged in the shechita should in any way taint the animal. I'll make a kal v'chomer. By Kodshim, thoughts are a really big deal. Yeah. But they're only a big deal for the person who's doing the avoda. Yeah, the person who's shechting the animal, if he's thinking while he's shechting the animal, a machshav of pigul, so then it taints the animal. It makes it non-valid for Kodshim. But if the owner of that animal has a machshava pesula, it's totally meaningless. So surely kal v'chomer for chulin, where machshava does not count as much as it does for Kodshim, surely the machshava, the thoughts of the owner of the animal who's not touching the animal at all, should not make a difference. And therefore Rabbi Yossi says, regardless of the thoughts of the heathen, the animal's flesh is completely 100% glat kosher. So the Gemara now says, Hani tanoi islahu de Rabbi Eliezer be Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara now has to properly explain. We have a three-way machlokus, but it sounds like Rabbi Yossi is subscribing to the Tanakama. So we have to explain what's the difference between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. They both hold that the thoughts of the idolater are irrelevant. So what's the difference? So the Gemara explains that both the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer both hold like Rabbi Eliezer b'Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya Amar Rabbi Eliezer b'Rabbi Yossi, Shamati shahaba'olim mifaglim. Mihu Tanakama savar ishamine dechashiv in ilo lo stam machshavas avikochavam lavodas kochavam lo amrinan. Rabbi Eliezer savar afagav de lo shaminu dechashiv stam machshavas avikochavam lavodas kochavam amrinan. So the machlokus between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer is as follows. They both agree that the thoughts of the owner can have a deleterious effect upon the animal in question. They both agree to that. Rabbi Eliezer b'Rabbi Yossi holds that if the owner of a korban has a machshava of pigul while the kohen is doing the avoda, the owner can actually taint the animal and make it invalid. And both the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer of our Mishnah subscribe to that shita. Why then does the Tanakama say that the animal's flesh is still kosher? Because we didn't hear the idolater say anything. Why should we assume that he has thoughts of Avodah Zarah when he sees the shechita taking place? We don't assume that just because he's a heathen, every action that is to his benefit is going to be for his god Jupiter. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees because he holds that anything that is beneficial to an idolater, he dedicates to his idolatry. And that's why Rabbi Eliezer says we have to assume that the animal is not kosher. But both of them agree that if we were to hear the heathen say, oh, God Jupiter, while the shechita is taking place, then they would both agree that the meat is not kosher, and it's asur bahana. So, and comes along Rabbi Yossi, asur Rabbi Yossi lemeimar, afal gav deshamine dechashiv ze mechashiv ze oivei lo amrinan. And what's Rabbi Yossi's fundamental machlok? He says, I argue with both of you. Even if, I hold that even if you explicitly hear the heathen say, oh, God Jupiter, it's meaningless, because what connection is there between his thoughts and the status of the animal? He has no effect whatsoever on the animal because he's not touching it, he's not doing anything to it. So that's one way of understanding the three-way machlokus in our Mishnah. Ika da Amri, others learn that b'deshamine dechashiv plige, that really the machlokus is, even when we hear the heathen say, oh God Jupiter, That's the machlokas. And so the Tanakama holds that the animal is still kosher because Tanakama savar ki amrinan zeh machashev is ha'oived hanimili bifnim avol b'chutz lo, because chutz mipnim lo yalfinan. Va'asa Rabbi Eliezer lememar yalfinan chutz mipnim. And so what's the machlokas, the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah? That both of them agree that when it comes to kodshim, the owner has the ability to taint the animal through a machshav of pigul, let's say, because kodshim is very sensitive to the thoughts of the people who are connected to the animal. The machlokas between the Tanakam and Rabbi Eliezer is, do we take the laws of kodshim and apply it to chulin? So the Tanakama says no. This is a unique halacha to kodshim, but it's got nothing to do with chulin. The thought of the owner cannot taint the animal for chulin, even though it can do so by kodshim. And Rabbi Eliezer says no. We learn the laws of chulin from the laws of kodshim, just like by kodshim the thought of the owner can taint the animal, so too by chulin the thoughts of the owner can taint the animal.
And the shaychet, he's out of the picture? And whatever he's thinking is irrelevant?
We didn't say it's irrelevant. We're saying that even if his thoughts are kosher, the owner can taint the animal at a distance. Right. The shochet can also. It doesn't trump the shochet.
He's either one or the other.
I don't know.
No.
If either one.
If two people are involved in a process and one thinks of avodah zarah and the other one doesn't, the animal, the object is still usher because of avodah zarah. Right. So it's not a conflicting.
The avodah zarah does trump the other machshava.
It's not a question of trumping. It's like if two people are standing by a well and one puts poison in and the other one doesn't, you don't say that the person who put poison in trumped the person who didn't put poison in. He spoiled the well. So that's what we're talking about over here.
That's Rabbi Eliezer and the Tanakama, but according to Rabbi Yossi, he would only hold.
So one second. So now we're getting to Rabbi Yossi. And Rabbi Yossi, va'asa Rabbi Yossi lemeimar afilu bifnim nami zemachashev ezeoived lo amrinan. And Rabbi Yossi says, I argue with both of you. Right. You subscribe to the idea that at least by kodshim, the owner at a distance can taint the animal through his machshava. I hold there's no such inyan, there's no such halacha at all, neither by kodshim nor by chulin. And therefore the animal will always be kosher regardless of what the thoughts of the heathen are. And this is where we'll hold it for today.
How do we pass